A very good evening and a warm welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us this Sunday evening. Tonight's show is done in collaboration with Center for Domestic Violence Prevention, CEDOVIP, with support from UK Aid. And tonight we will be talking about commercial sexual exploitation of children, CSEC, on the show. I'll quickly introduce my panel and I'll start right next to me. Hassan Suleiman Sonko, who is a program officer at CEDOVIP under the local activism department. He is part of the team at the forefront of implementing SASA to prevent violence against women and girls and commercial sexual exploitation of children in Kampala. Welcome, Hassan.
Thank you.
Anne Nasamla is a program officer at CEDOVIP as well. She is at the forefront of building the capacity of community activists to implement SASA, a community mobilization methodology used in prevention of violence against women and girls. She spearheads work with institutions of higher learning and coordinates a network of organizations that provide services to survivors of violence. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Josephine.
And finally, at the end, we have Tina Musu, who is one of the most acclaimed violence against women and girls activists in Uganda. She is the executive director of Center for Domestic Violence Prevention, CEDOVIP. She has 16 years of experience of working with communities, police, civil society, local governments and policymakers to prevent violence against women and girls, female genital mutilation and commercial sex exploitation of children. She coordinated the development of the Uganda Police Force Domestic Violence Handbook and the Police GBV Training Manual, the Judicial Training Institute's GBV Training Manual as well. Thank you very much, Tina, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Good evening, Josephine.
All right, so we're talking about commercial sexual exploitation of children, and when I think about this, I think about brothels and you know, things like that. Is there more to this than we know?
Yeah, when we talk about commercial sexual exploitation of children, there are other components away from the ones we have mentioned. First of all, we can first talk about its broader definition. CSEC, we can say it is an exploitation situation where perpetrators, who is an adult, can commercially sexually exploit children, coerce them into sexual activities for their material benefits. In this case, it is the adult to benefit financially. But they exploit the children, but it is them to benefit financially.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so I think a story, when I asked you to share a story earlier, you shared this story with me, and I think it will help us paint the picture for where our conversation is going and also explain exactly what commercial sexual exploitation of children looks like. Magda is a 16-year-old girl and she goes to school in one of the secondary schools in Kampala. She comes from a humble family that can only afford to pay school fees and basic necessities like books and pens. When Magda joined the school, she noticed that there was a group of girls from humble homes just like hers, but they had luxurious things like phones, and sometimes they would be picked up from school by strange men in cars. One day the girls approached Magda and told her that they have an auntie who wanted to speak to her. Magda agreed and met the auntie. The auntie, named Faith, met with Magda one evening and told her that it was possible for her to have luxurious things just like the other girls. She told her that there are good men who give such gifts to girls like her. That very evening, Faith brought in some men in the room where Magda had met her, and the men bought for Magda some drinks, gave her some money, and the rest of the money was given to Auntie Faith. When the men left, Auntie Faith told Magda that such gifts will continue coming her way if she did not tell anyone about it. She also told Magda that the men she had met are well connected and they would kill her if she told anyone. Due to fear, Magda would meet Auntie Faith anytime when she called her to meet a man or two. On several occasions, the men would force her into having sex with them. Auntie Magda told her that many girls do such things and that it is okay. Eventually, Magda got pregnant and her parents found out. She tried to explain, but they could not believe her. They told her that she is a spoilt girl who does not appreciate the little efforts by her parents. Similarly, people in her community ridiculed her and called her names like prostitute. She went back to Auntie Faith to seek for support, and Auntie Faith told her that the only way she can help her is by giving her some money to have an abortion. Magda carried out the abortion, which turned out to be complicated. She bled continuously and lost her life. And this story was told by other girls who are also being commercially exploited by anti-faith. For some people, these stories are stories they read in books, so with illustrations and stories that they think are just supposed to be there to scare them into avoiding things like this. Do these stories actually happen? Do we have an anti-faith? Do we have an Ida there? I know these are not their real names, but do these people exist?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so that they exist. Actually, more than even what you've read, but similar stories. Recently, we had a case of a girl who was trafficked from northern Uganda, and when she was brought to one of the Kampala suburbs, she was promised a job. The girl is 14 years old. Remember, also that's against the laws, but she was promised a job to work as a housemaid. Unfortunately, as things unfolded, the job that she was promised was for her to carry out the sex trade. But just like Hassan mentioned, she's not benefiting from that. And even if she was benefiting, remember, this is a child who's supposed to be guided by the adults. But when she was brought to one of the Kampala suburbs, she worked in a bar, and during the day she would work as a bar attendant, but in the evening she would they would get clients for her. So the person that brought her from the village was the bar owner, who was her uncle. So she would work as a bar teller, she would work as a bar attendant, and in the evening she would be engaged into sex. And the same people that would maybe drink from the same bars are the same people that would have sex with her, but through the uncle.
So they would pay the uncle? Yes,
they would pay the uncle. And some people may say that, maybe these girls are given some money, but later on we will look into the grooming process. These girls, how are they groomed? How are they threatened to the fact that they cannot really
Before we get to the grooming process, I'm curious to know, how else does it happen? Is it always the obvious story that we know of an auntie and uncle? In what other ways are these girls convinced to join this kind of situation that they find themselves in? Tina?
So the people who involve themselves in commercial sex exploitation of children treat the children as commodities on sale. So it's quite different from the sexual abuse that is random, because then that is done between the perpetrator for their own gratification. Now with commercial sex exploitation, there's a third party who is selling this child. And as you asked, it is happening in many, many ways. If you look at these children, the Karamajong children begging on the street, that's part of the commercial sex exploitation. There's someone big behind the scenes who is actually taking that money from them, and during daytime, that's like a display activity
for what they do,
for the ones who pay for the sex. Then I'm sure you've heard of things like Vimansulo, those nude dances. So many of these girls are brought from wherever, promised jobs or scholarships, and then they end up in such things. So the adults who have brought them sell them to the people who are buying sex, and the money is taken by those. And then there's what they call sex tourism. That is also part of the commercial sex exploitation, where they bring these young girls for the gratification of the tourists who are coming. Like in tourist hangouts, you always find young girls, but there's someone behind the scenes who is bringing these girls. And what should be of critical importance here, it cuts across even children from well-to-do families. They get these children from school, they get them from home, and mainly through social media contact. So those perpetrators have access, and it's big business, because it's a big cartel that is behind the scenes.
So 3 questions come up for me from that. When you speak about, I'd like you to paint a picture about the women and girls that we see on the street, because what we think now is that they're just begging for money on the street. But when we put them under commercial sexual exploitation, then there's a sexual aspect to it that we don't see on the street.
So what actually happens, there are some recruiters, I would call them recruiters, who go to those villages and pay some money to the parents and promise to take care of their children. Now when those children come here, that act of them begging on the street is part of the grooming process, making the children to adopt to a new unfamiliar setting, and make them, as they're building trust, the perpetrators are building trust with this child. So they give them little niceties to win the trust of the children. Then the next step is to isolate them from their parents or the people they know. So the next thing is keep contact out. So they will shift this child who has been begging maybe here on Nile Avenue. They take to another area, Natete, an unfamiliar territory. And while they are there, that's when now the sexual abuse begins, because the child cannot tell anyone. And remember, children have been told that involving in sex is criminal. It is bad manners.
And they're also being threatened by the same people, and you're told, like Magda, that will kill you.
Yes.
You also spoke about using social media. How does that happen?
So, you see, many young people, even adults, you know, when you're on Facebook, you get invites from friends. And they will be very nice to you, so you accept them to become friends. But they are strangers, you don't know them. So you continue to chat as they are finding out a lot of information about you. And sadly, many people trust faster online. So they tell so many stories, and the other person is talking so good that this person starts to trust. So they start by maybe sending gifts and always being there to listen, saying all the nice, calming things to this person. And then finally they're commenting
on every picture that you put up there.
Yes, every picture, every conversation. They are counseling them, promising heaven on earth. So as this person builds trust, they start to lure them to even take naked pictures, nude pictures. And now they're done.
You,
Yes, or they ask them for an outing, let's go for coffee. The person goes innocently and they're hooked, because then they will get them involved in very criminal activities. They'll either introduce them to alcohol or drugs or sex, or the three combination. So, and unfortunately, in this country of ours, people are super harsh to children. They don't see that these are children who are being abused, who are being exploited. It's very annoying to see adults saying, they are spoiled. The children are abused. They are exploited.
All right, let's take a short break, and we'll start from there when we return. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Tonight we are speaking about commercial sexual exploitation, and this particular show is done in collaboration with CEDOVIP with support from UK Aid. We've been talking about the children involved, and from all of us, when I hear us, we're all speaking about girls. Does this not happen to boys, Hassan?
Yeah, it also happens to boys, but if we look at the magnitude, and if we compare the number of boys that are sexually, commercially exploited and the number of girls, it happens more to girls. I'll just give an example of the current situation, which is COVID-19. Today, if you go to the communities where we work, you find out that many of the girls are being trafficked to different places to be sexually, commercially exploited. The boys are also commercially, sexually exploited, but the girls are more at risk.
And Josephine, can I add to that? And these perpetrators sometimes involve the boys to be the go-between, the recruiters. So you'll find that spaces where the girls are, these young boys are also there, and they are part of luring and covering up what is going on. So the boys are also equally
How do they cover up?
So now, if the child is still at home, these boys who study with her will be like friends or friends to the brother, and now the other pimps use this contact to get more. So that's how they, and now these young boys are also exposed to drinking and also early sex as well. So it's a big problem.
Why is it that girls are the ones that are mostly, involved in this? In one of the previous shows that we did, one of the things that we saw coming out of COVID-19, even though they kept saying, oh, stay away from truck drivers, it was, women stay away. But then we realized that some children, girl children, were being actually given out to them. Why is it mostly girls?
So it's mostly girls because really girls are at risk because of the low status that the society accords the girls. society looks at the girls as really a very weaker sex, just like we've looked at both men and women. Society looks at the girls as a really a weak sex, and they look at the girls as kind of a sort of an object for sale. And also we look at the early marriages. Like when we look at the early marriages, of course, it's a girl that is given out at an early age, below the age of 18. And also, earlier on we mentioned that commercial sex exploitation of children is perpetrated through early marriages. You find that a parent will send off their child to go and marry so that they can be able to get some kind of dowry. So they are looked at as the source of dowry right from the moment when a girl is given birth to. They look at them as a source of dowry. You know the terms they give to girls. When a woman gives birth to a girl, they will say she has given birth to sukari. She has given birth to sugar.
They're not children.
They're not children. And you know how the boys take a lot of privileges in the community. So still this one also impacts on how CSEC is perpetrated, because a girl is looked at as a source of commodity. A girl is looked at as a source of income. Recently when we were in the community, they told us that there is a family which usually sends away their girls. Like they tell them, you know, today we do not have sauce, so it's up to you to get for us sauce.
Whichever way you do it.
Whichever we do it, we do not care. And you know, they don't do that to the boys. So the low status that is accorded to the girls, the early marriages, the violence against women and girls really puts the girls at risk of commercial sex exploitation. I
mean, it's very absurd when we come to realize that there are still communities where a girl is sugar. You know, it's absurd. It just doesn't seem like something that we still have happening within us. Do we have any figures for what this commercial sexual exploitation looks like? Do we know what the status is for Uganda?
In a study that was done in 2008 by International Labour Organization, we see that almost above 800,000 girls face commercial sex exploitation in Uganda. But also away from the studies that were done, in our day-to-day, our daily work, almost in every 10 families, it's absurd that in almost every 10 families, at least there is one case or two of commercial sex exploitation. It can be direct or indirect, but that's something really sad, and that's something that we actually have to pay a keen interest on.
And it's again terribly ignored and also tolerated, because people are always blaming the girls. They're like, oh, girls are spoiled. Girls like luxurious things. But there's someone behind the scenes pushing those girls to be abused. And there's this tendency of thinking that it's the girls to control the sexual urges of men. Now that's a narrative that needs to change. Men are responsible people in charge of their faculties.
Hence, don't wear miniskirts and things like that.
Because even if you wear gomas, they're going to pull it off. So
yeah. You mentioned, Tina, earlier you were speaking about places that exacerbate this, and you spoke about nudity places, you spoke about bars and things. Yes. Which other places do we see this happening?
There are very many places I will mention, and my colleagues can add. In some of those, with all due respect, the slum places, there are what people call the yumba houses that have changed, because some people think that if you rent your little shacks, I would call them, if you rent your houses for regular tenants, you don't make as much money. So they turn them into dens of commercial sex exploitation of children that come, a day you may have like 10 or so clients. So those will be yumba. And then neighborhoods where they've been intergenerational commercial sex exploitation. Because if children are brought and they are involved in this, they will have children with no source of income. So their children will even start at a much younger age. If, for example, you went to Chimombasa in Bwaise, it's a hotspot. And some zones within Kabalagala are also hotspot. Maybe my colleagues can add.
So communities always know where these homes are, or these places are?
Yes, they know these spots. And actually the third party who sells the children, they know these places, and they organize with the buyers, the people who come to buy the girls, to sexually commercially exploit them. For instance, in Kabalagala, there's a certain place called the Kataba. Almost all the houses around, people are not, they are not homes for people, but these houses are used for this kind of business.
I'm curious about how your team figures out which place do you, how is this research done?
Because you work in these communities. Yeah.
Okay.
So in these houses there are brothels where this kind of business happens. In addition to that, we also have other brothels like the bars. You know, some bars in these slum areas. These people, what they do, they employ young girls to work as waitresses. But in addition to working as waitress, there is another job you're doing. They connect you to men to sexually harass you, but it is the boss benefiting from this kind of transaction. So we have this kind of transactions happen in bars, in lodges, and other brothels, and even in big hotels.
But are children are working in bars and brothels and things like that?
So when you're to get to the core, because there's so much secrecy around it, it's happening from under. So when you get to a community, you have to do what we call a formative study to really understand how it happens and who is involved and how you go around it. Because if you went head on to ask, is there commercial sex exploitation of children here, they are going to say no. So it's usually covered up in a seemingly normal business. It even goes to the regular food vending, you know, those young girls who are serving food.
Yeah.
So the owner of that business does not pay the child, tells them, oh, the client will pay. And those clients who buy that food also know. So it's not all of those formal organizations, but some of them are actually doing it.
And also, Josephine, to add, it's not only in brothels, but sadly in places of worship. Like we've had some places of worship. We've had where children are going for overnights. And you know, when you would easily trust that, you know, my child is going for an overnight.
When we say children, first let's put context to children.
Yes.
What age are we looking at?
Below the age of 18.
Below 18.
Yeah.
They go as young as 10 years.
Yes.
So a 10-year-old is going for an overnight?
Yes.
Alone?
Maybe
You know,
with friends.
Maybe with friends, and you know, sometimes you as a parent, because you feel a place of worship is something that's safe, really. You can trust your child to be there alone or with friends. Unfortunately, people have taken advantage of such cases. Children have been exploited sexually.
Or my child is going for practice for dance for church or something like that.
Yes.
And we even heard that in some communities, some people within schools are involved in selling these children. If it's a boarding school, maybe the askari man and the matron are part of the network. So the problem is quite big. We have to cast our net as wide as possible.
All right.
Also, to add to what Tina is saying, many people would say maybe it's for only those that are out of school, and they'll feel that my child is safe since she or he is in a boarding school. But just like she has mentioned, it cuts across both those that go to school and those that are out of school.
What is happening in the communities where you work as CEDOVIP? What is the trend there now?
So initially when we got in, of course we are not working everywhere, but in specific communities. They told us, oh, it's not there, and the people could not tell the difference between sexual abuse and sex exploitation. Now we were able, and they were blaming the children for what was going on, while some did not care because these were children brought from a different area. Now with our engagement, they were able to increase knowledge of what the problem was, and they started to have the Ubuntu, caring for children instead of ignoring. So we've had quite a number of men and women who have come up to rescue these children. They've even reported the cases, and in many communities, maybe my colleagues can talk about it, they've come up with, you know, owners of bars saying we cannot let children work here.
Yeah.
Even owners of lodges. I don't want to finish all the good stories from my colleagues.
I've seen, every time I have a show recently during this COVID period, and even before, there's always the element of children. It feels like children have been the most burdened during this time, but also even before. And there's this helpline 116. Yeah, is that a helpline that people can, whoever is watching and knows that, well, within my community, there is this place that I suspect, you know, might be promoting this kind of behavior. Is that a number to call as well?
Yes.
Yes.
So who else do we call? Who else do we reach out to?
Some people may not be able to call, but we have the local council leaders, people that work within the communities, so people can easily reach out to those people and they work with them because they've got aware, they know that these things do exist. So people can work with them, then they can be able to also report to police.
Okay. Yes, yes, you're going to add before I cut you short with my 116 call.
Yes, the nice stories.
Well, I was going to say that in all the communities actually in Uganda, people are aware that there are LCs, chairmen. These chairmen are working with the police. So in case you detect that maybe a girl is being trafficked or the girl is going to be commercially sexually exploited, please go and report to the chairperson. The chairperson can work with the police and rescue the child.
Well, I have to ask, I guess, do we trust the law enforcers? And not in a bad way, I'm just trying to find out that in your research, have you found that sometimes law enforcers or local leaders might be involved in these things?
So some of them are involved, while some, after the training and grooming and building trust within the community, are doing a wonderful job. There's one guy who recently left university. He was one of the pimps. But with this engagement, this guy changed. And he has become an activist within his community. Now he's into the car washing business. And he has cut off the connections with the fellow pimps. And he's the one who has been like a good informer of the authorities of where, you know, he's like the spy because he knows how the trade happens.
Why was he doing it in the first place?
So he started it from the university because he used to have several girlfriends. And then other boys were interested and other men because he was in a hostel. And they were wondering about how he changes girlfriends with ease. So someone tipped him that, oh, why can't, if some people want girls for sex, why don't you charge them a fee? So that's how he got involved in that trade. And he was having clients as far as beyond Kampala. Wow. But now he sees, after this engagement, he sees the harm that he created. Because now he was able even to see some of his victims whose lives have been messed. And then he has 2 daughters. Now he's like, I just don't want this to happen to my daughters.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, let's take another short break and we'll be right back and we can start with you when we come back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We are coming to you from the Kampala Serena Conference Center from the NTV Uganda studios. I want us to talk now about the consequences. We know that there are consequences to this conversation, you know, the things that are happening that have led us to this conversation at all levels. Can you speak to me about what it looks like on the national level?
So at the national level, of course, this is really interfering with the development at large. And when young girls and boys' lives are being robbed away through sex exploitation, which is, of course, involved with drugs and alcohol and other related crimes, I mean, that's a future stolen away from us. And then remember, these perpetrators get these young people to recruit more. So education outcomes, 0. And then, of course, the infection rates of various diseases, because this is a high-risk kind of activity. And then, of course, they'll be exposed to HIV and AIDS, hepatitis B, unwanted pregnancies and children, you know, children giving birth to children. That it doesn't help us at all. And then the intergenerational commercial sex exploitation. Because if you're born into that kind of lifestyle, it sort of becomes a thing you take on. Exactly. Yeah. And then even this CSEC here in the urban center becomes the grooming process for the international trafficking in persons. So it's a very serious problem that we shouldn't be ignoring as a country. Okay. Why do people do it? Even before we look at maybe an individual level, the consequences on that level, why do people do it? You spoke about that young man who, you know, started out at the university and you explained why he was doing it. Why do other people do it?
Well, we can say that People do it, the perpetrators, they are doing it because they want money, but behind it there is the issue of using your power over this child, because this child cannot say no, this child cannot negotiate, this child, does not have confidence to say no to what you are proposing. Behind it there is power issues. But yet, much as the perpetrators say, we are doing it to make money. Yes, you are doing it to make money, but why don't you go and do it with an adult? You can't do it with an adult. Why? Because the adult has confidence. He can say no to what you are saying. The adult can say, give how much, what is my share after this transaction? Okay. But because the child cannot stand and negotiate with you, or maybe say no, that's why these perpetrators keep on using their power over these children.
And there are also myths surrounding it. Like, people feel if I engage myself in sex with a younger person, it's more gratifying, more satisfying. So they feel with the young people, those are all myths. It's more satisfying to have it with a young person. And some of them actually say that the young people do not have HIV/AIDS. So I would rather go and have it with them. Some people attach it to luck, that the young children have a lot of luck in terms of business. So if you have sexual intercourse with a young person, then you get lucky. So there are all kind of myths surrounding that. But of course, just like Hassan mentioned, it's the power issue. They feel the high authority they have over the children, yes.
And you see, this is illegal business, and yet it has high returns. They have ready clients who are paying, and so they don't invest much in the business, so it's high paying to them, and yet it continues with impunity, because the perpetrators are almost never brought to book. Now that level of impunity also really escalates the problem.
Yeah. When we look at, when I remember you speaking about the street children, is this also a thing about, there's an opportunity right there that's before you. You have people sleeping on the street, people who need help, and you then choose to take advantage of that?
Exactly. Those perpetrators really ride on the vulnerability of these people who are lacking food, lacking basic things in life. You also find that back home where they are coming from, they were struggling because parents will give away their children if they can't feed them or educate them. So these perpetrators know who to target. They always look for the ones who are vulnerable. If they are not too poor, then they will look for those children who could be maybe struggling with emotional issues. They've been abandoned. Sometimes parents abandon children. They think that when you give money, that's enough. It's not enough. So these children are craving for love and for attachment. So these perpetrators also find those ones. You touch briefly on mental health. Is that something that you've clearly explained that? What of drugs? Oh yes, drugs. So now what these perpetrators do is they get these children hooked to drugs. So when the children are craving for drugs, now that is the condition for them to, in fact, that's one way in which they maintain those children within that kind of exploitation. So they coerce them to either recruit more so that they can fix them with the drug, or go for they buy for the sexual exploitation so that they can give them another fix of drug.
Does this explain why when we hear stories of children taken off the street, or children, they've tried to get somebody help, and this child runs away anyway, away from what you'd think is a safe space? Do we then look at drugs in this case as the hook that they use?
Yes, it is drugs, the trauma the child has experienced, and then the threats, because these perpetrators know where this child came from, and they keep intimidating them that if you leave, they are going to kill the child, or they are going to harm her family. Does the Stockholm Syndrome come into play, that you then feel attached to this person who, has been your sort of godfather, or does it work in this case? Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Okay. We spoke at consequences at a national level. What of at an individual level?
Yes, at an individual level, of course, when these girls are commercially sexually exploited, they end up getting diseases like HIV, unwanted pregnancy. When you go to communities actually where we prevent C-sec, they will tell you these stories. They'll even tell you that so-and-so's daughter got pregnant, so-and-so's daughter got infected with HIV. So there are so many consequences that come to the children experience after being exposed to this kind of exploitation.
And also to add to what Hassan said, there is the immediate effect would be trauma and a lot of stigma in the community, and also that doesn't enable them to live freely in the community. And even when they go to school, they kind of drop out of school, or there is that poor performance in schools because they've been traumatized. And if they've been traumatized, definitely their performance levels will definitely go down. So there is a lot of trauma, a lot of stigma in the community, which also emotionally and physically and in all ways possible affect the children that are commercially sexually exploited.
And they are trapped in poverty for almost to the end of their lives because they are unable to jump out of that kind of arrangement unless if they get support.
It was mentioned earlier, again, the mental health of these children, but also the fact that you can't trust an adult anymore. You don't know which adult is safe for you to speak to, and especially if it is an adult within your own home, as we are seeing with this period of COVID-19 and the lockdown that we are all, inside the house.
Yes, they don't trust adults anymore, and therefore they'll go either to trust their fellow peers, and they'll engage in deviant behavior as a coping mechanism. If you've interfaced with some of those children, they'll even be speaking very vulgar language. But that's what they've been subjected to. They need to be supported, but unfortunately people reject them thinking that they're really bad children, but it is the trauma, the pain that they live in. Some of them can't sleep, they have to use drugs or a lot of alcohol to enable them even sleep.
I think our rejection of them also speaks a lot about our ignorance of the subject that we are speaking about. In closing, because we just have a few minutes, what can we do? And I'll start with you, Hassan. In your closing remarks to us, what do you think should be done?
What I think should be done is, one, the adults should make it deliberate and do research about what C-sec is, because in most cases, many of them don't differentiate between commercial sex exploitation of children and sexual abuse. So if they take time and understand the difference between the two, then they will be able to know what we are talking about. And that way, they will be able to reach out to chairmen, police, wherever they see children who are at C-sec risk.
And the difference between the two is the money that exchanges hands.
Yeah, this one, the difference is with the C-sec there are three parties. There is a child, then there is this perpetrator who is selling the child to the perpetrator who is going to sexually abuse the child.
And in closing, just quickly run me through the grooming process. I remember that I cut you short on that one, but also tell me what you think should be done.
So quickly, in the grooming process, of course, when the perpetrators get the children, there is a lot of befriending, and there are a lot of gifts and a lot of promises that happen. And when they finally get the children to be their clients, or to be the people that they would commercially sexually exploit, there are a lot of threats. If you leave, or if you tell someone, if you tell an adult, or if you report to police or any local council member, we will maybe kill you, we will stop giving you the support that we are giving you, we'll take you back to the village, because children come with a lot of needs. So because of that, they are threatened and they are trapped in the commercial sex exploitation, and it even makes them hard to live, because the community where they are going already, like we mentioned earlier, there is a lot of stigma. They say these girls are spoiled, these boys are spoiled, malaya. So really it makes it hard. They are trapped in the commercial sex exploitation.
And the perpetrators use violence.
Yes.
They beat them to stay there.
They beat them. Like we mentioned earlier, they are very powerful people. They have the weapon of power, some of them, like the guns. So it's really hard.
But also the power in the community as well.
Yes, which really makes them so hard and so trapped.
What do you think should be done, Anne?
So what I think should be done is we should break the normality on C-sec. People have normalized it. You mentioned earlier that people may not be knowing, but even for those that know, they think it's normal. and they will not talk about it. So let people break the silence on commercial sex exploitation of children. Let them speak up. We have the laws. We have the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act and the Penal Code Act, which protects whoever will be reporting and also which protects the children. It's stated clearly in the Penal Code Act. So let's break the silence on commercial sex exploitation of children. Let's report cases. Let's report cases to police. Let's work with all the duty bearers to ensure that the perpetrators are held accountable and that the children get the necessary support. Right. And also for all the parents and guardians to take the responsibility to guide all the children, because there is always a tendency of parents thinking, you know, if I'm in a gated house or I have a wall fence around me, or I've taken my children to boarding school, my children are safe. Yeah. We should know that we are not all safe until all of us are safe. Right. So everyone should be kept safe, especially the children.
I'm just curious to know how a parent then begins to realize something is not right with my child, so that, you know, those little things they can watch out for and say, maybe something's happening here. In closing, if you could speak to that, Tina, but also to speak to when you make some of the places that were mentioned when you said places of worship and things. I'm also now thinking about places like orphanages, places where we think really the children are safe here. What do we do about places like that? Who is watching these places? Who is making impromptu visits and just making sure that the activities that are promised, you know, on the outside are actually what is taking place? What do we do?
So very quickly, if people want to be aware of what may be happening to their children, I think for every adult, let us make it a priority to protect children. And when we say protecting children, we need to look at their physical safety, their emotional well-being, their sexual safety. So once you see your child being withdrawn, like you're at home and you never talk with your child, they are locked up in the bedroom, and maybe they're on the social media endlessly, and they don't even show you who their friends are, and maybe they tell lies, and they are not even performing well in school, those are already indicators that certain things are not happening well. Also see what's the relationship between your child and maybe a former worker who used to work at home. Do they still have secret connections? What are those secret connections about? There's need to be more open to really know what is going on. And for every parent, we need to understand what is abuse of any form and what is exploitation. That's why we mustn't close ourselves to learning. And we need to remember that children are being abused. Let us change the narrative. When you see a child who is sexually abused, stop blaming them for that abuse. They are below the age of 18. They cannot consent. And therefore they are being abused. So for me, very quickly, we need to remember that children need protection. And let us not take it for granted, because the places of safety have let children down, including homes, schools, communities. We need to be vigilant to become watchdogs. And like what you asked about who should be monitoring, the Ministry of Gender and the probation officers, because the Department of Children falls there, they need to be more vigilant to check in schools with the school inspectors. What are the safety measures for children there? When it comes to the community, what are the safety measures? Even at the LC level, there is there are child committees at the community level, plus the youth, you know, the LC for youth and children. They need to be more vigilant to really understand what is happening to children, and for everyone to know that if there is suspicion, why should a child be vending food at 7 p.m. surely? That is exploitation, and it's exposing that child to being abused. We shouldn't be accepting that. Parents need to let them go vend that food, and the child stays at home. If we give our children to a good auntie or uncle, we need to have their ID. We need to make sure that if, for example, you say your child is going to be, maybe Josephine, I'm taking your child for sponsorship. You need to have my ID. Your local leaders need to know who Tina is, so that there is data about me. Instead of thinking, oh, Tina is going to pay school fees for my child. You need to know, and you need to have access to where I'm taking your child, so that there's some bit of formality, and there has to be communication between your child. And if the child complains, listen to the child's instinct.
Yeah.
Don't look at the money and say, oh, you're spoiling your fortunes.
Let's not take things for granted. Communities are not, you know, what they used to be. Remember when they used to say a child is raised by
a community?
A community, yeah.
Instead, the communities are eating up the children.
Yeah. When you said earlier about child labor, and I thought of the children on the streets vending eggs and bananas at 7 p.m. And I remember one time I'm driving and I see a truck stop and all the children, you know, jumped at Fairway. And I think we did a story related to that. But that means that somebody is picking up these children. So that really gives a lot of credence to the story that you're telling us. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking the time to join us. Unfortunately, our time is fast spent, but it's been a real pleasure having you speak about child sexual exploitation, commercial child sexual exploitation. Thank you very much. Tina, Anne, and Hassan, it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our show for tonight. Coming up is NTV Weekend Edition.